La relación entre México y Australia es un testimonio de cómo, a pesar de la distancia geográfica, dos naciones pueden encontrarse unidas por valores, sueños y el compromiso mutuo de construir un futuro compartido. A lo largo de los años, México y Australia han cultivado una amistad profunda, basada en el respeto y en la visión compartida de un mundo donde la cooperación y la inclusión sean el camino hacia el progreso. Esta relación ha florecido en proyectos de intercambio académico, colaboración cultural y alianzas económicas que benefician a miles de personas en ambos países. En esta entrevista celebraremos esa conexión única, explorando las oportunidades futuras y reafirmando el compromiso de México y Australia de seguir caminando juntos. Hi, good morning. We are in Australian Embassy with Rachel Moseley, Australian Ambassador to Mexico. We are here because we would like to know more about you. First of all, what do you think about Mexico, about our country?
Well, I love Mexico. This is the second time I've been posted here. So there aren't many places in Mexico that I haven't traveled, whether for work or for pleasure. I had my honeymoon here in Mexico, and my first child was born here. So she's a Mexican as well as an Australian.
Really?
So I truly love Mexico, and it's such an honor to represent my country in Mexico.
It's so fantastic. Well, first question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your roles as Australian ambassador to Mexico?
A little bit about myself. Well, I was born in England and I moved to Australia as a child. I grew up in Australia and went to university there. I then joined the Foreign Service when I was 25. And so for the last 20 odd years, I've been working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I've been posted in Europe, in Switzerland. I've been posted here in Mexico and also in Papua New Guinea, which is Australia's closest neighbour and a very important partner for us. In Canberra, I've had a range of different roles. The most recent before coming here as ambassador was to lead Australia's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So that's a little bit about me in terms of my role here and what I've been asked to do in Mexico. My job is to strengthen the relationship between Mexico and Australia, both at the government-to-government level, but also at the people-to-people level. My job is to advance Australia's interests here, but also, of course, to advance our interests in all of my countries of accreditation. I'm accredited to 8 other countries. I would also say my job is to provide key services to Australians, the Australian public travelling overseas, to provide them with consular and passport services. So my job is quite varied, but I love it, and I love trying to build bridges between Australia and Mexico and the other countries I work in.
Well, you have been in a lot of countries and did a lot of work. Yes.
Yes, I've been working for a while, for over 20 years. Yeah.
I think that your career is fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, how would you describe your experience as Australian ambassador to Mexico so far?
Mhm.
What are the highlights of your work here since you arrived in Mexico?
Sure. Well, I think a big highlight was presenting my credentials to President López Obrador before the change, the change of leadership to President Sheinbaum. I'd also say another highlight for me has been the range of visits I've received from senior ranking Australians to Mexico in the last 12 months. I'd probably mention 3 visits in particular. Mexico's the president of MICTA this year. That's a group of 5 countries: Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey and Australia, a group of middle power G20 countries that come together every year at the ministerial level, at the senior officials level, to talk about challenges facing the world, but also how we can cooperate together. And under Mexico's presidency, they invited all of the speakers of the Houses of Representatives of those 5 countries to Mexico. So we welcomed the Honourable Milton Dick, MP, who's our speaker. So it was fantastic to have such a senior ranking Australian visit Mexico. We also had some visits by Australia's Gender Equality Ambassador. Gender is an issue where we work a lot with Mexico. We have very similar values in this space. So to have 2 visits by our Gender Equality Ambassador, including for Mexico's important Feminist Foreign Policy Conference in July, was really important. And then lastly, we had a visit by the CEO of the Australian Institute for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. That's the equivalent in our system to IMPI. And during their visit, they had a range of very interesting meetings looking at how we can collaborate to protect and defend Indigenous culture. Australia has the oldest surviving Indigenous culture in the world. There is evidence that Aboriginal Australians have been living on our land for 65,000 years. So protecting and advancing the culture of our Indigenous people is a really key issue for Australia, and I know it is for Mexico. So that's been another area of cooperation that I'm very excited to advance.
Okay, those are impressive highlights.
Thank you.
Yes, it sounds like you are making a great job, and yeah, hard work. Please, could you describe the relationship with Australia with Mexico? Which are the main areas of cooperation?
Sure. Well, I think trade and investment is a really important area of our partnership. Mexico is Australia's largest trading partner in all of Latin America. There's around $5.5 billion worth of trade between Australia and Mexico every year. That's largely in Mexico's favour. We import a lot of Mexican passenger vehicles, but Australia also exports a lot of grain. So with the introduction of the CPTPP, which is our regional free trade agreement that we're both members of, and the reduction of tariffs, Australia's been able to export, for example, more grain. So over the past couple of years, we've exported billions of dollars worth of Australian barley, which goes into Mexican beer. And the nice thing about that is we then import it back from Mexico because we love drinking Mexican beer. So that's a nice kind of story we like to tell in terms of the bilateral trading relationship. There's also a lot of Australian investment in Mexico. We have some major companies that invest in the infrastructure and energy sectors. So that's been a really wonderful thing for me to see, is the interest of Australian companies in Mexico. As I mentioned earlier, Mexico and Australia share a lot of common values, whether it be the work we do on gender or the rights of Indigenous peoples. Recently in the Human Rights Council, both of our countries were really pleased to see an agreement around giving a voice to Indigenous peoples on issues that affect them. So the work we do on human rights has been another key aspect of the relationship. And then lastly, around people-to-people links, I've been really pleased to see the number of Mexican students grow. We now have around 3,500 Mexicans studying in Australia, and we're a really multicultural nation, and we love having Mexicans and other Latin Americans in our cities, opening restaurants so we can enjoy Mexican food and culture. So that people-to-people link is really an interesting part of the job as well.
Talking about priorities, what are your priorities moving forward, especially with the new administration of our president, Claudia Sheinbaum?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, we've been really thrilled to see Mexico elect its first female president, and we really look forward to engaging with her administration. We have a range of existing priorities that I've outlined, but I can see opportunity for Australia and Mexico under Claudia Sheinbaum's presidency to do more together in the climate change space. She obviously has incredible credentials of her own and has important plans to transform Mexico's economy towards more renewable energy in particular. Australia has a lot of expertise to bring to bear in that space, but also, again, common values around what we want to achieve. Australia and Mexico are both facing considerable challenges around climate change. In Australia, we can experience terrible droughts, floods, and bushfires all in the same year, sometimes all at the same time. And as we've seen in Mexico with the recent Hurricane Otis, climate change can bring really devastating effects. It's also impacting our region. It's become quite an existential threat for our neighbours in the Pacific. So I'd like to see what we can do together, both, I guess, nationally, regionally, and internationally in the area of climate change. I also note the President's agenda around digital transformation. For Australia, closing the digital divide has been a really important issue for us, including in our development program. So I'd like to see what more we can do with Mexico in ensuring that everyone has access to these really important technologies, which have a really important impact on the development of countries around our world, around the globe.
Great to hear that you are very focused on those important priorities. We understand there is an important presence of Australian companies in Mexico. How has Mexico benefited from Australian investment?
Well, I think I'd mentioned three key companies that are investing in Mexico at the moment. The first is Woodside Energy. Woodside has a joint venture with Pemex that was signed off by President AMLO last year. It's in the Gulf of Mexico. It's an ultra-deep water project called Trion, just off the coast of Matamoros. And together they'll be producing by 2028 over 100,000 barrels of oil a day, which I think is a really significant contribution.
Yes, it is.
And then I think the second company I'd mention is Macquarie Group. Macquarie Group's been in Mexico for over 15 years. They have a couple of different aspects of their business here. The first is a real estate investment trust, and they have over 150 properties across Mexico that are really helping to drive that nearshoring moment that we're experiencing in Mexico at the moment. And over the next couple of years, they have significant plans to build new infrastructure on the border in Ciudad Juarez, in Reynosa, in Tijuana. So that's a significant component of their business is the real estate side. They also do a lot of work in infrastructure. So they build roads, airports. They also invest significantly in renewable energy and wind farms, for example. So they're really helping with that kind of change to renewable energies that we're seeing the current president really promote. And lastly, I'd mention Aliatica. Aliatica is a transport infrastructure company that is owned by IFM Investors, an Australian fund, and they're responsible for pieces of transport infrastructure that we use every day, parts of the Segundo Piso. They're building a new piece of freeway, 77 kilometres between Altacomulco and Atitzipan, which will help people connect more easily and more safely to Guadalajara. And they're also responsible for the Circuito Exterior Mexiquense, which helped connect the new airport, the new AIFA airport. I'm really proud not only of the quality of the infrastructure that they build, but also the work they're doing through their foundation to promote road safety. So unfortunately in Mexico, there are 4 times the number of road fatalities every year than we see in Australia.
Yes.
And so they're really trying to build that road safety culture in Mexico. So yes, there are many more examples, but they're probably 3 key companies investing in Mexico that we're particularly proud to support.
It's very impressive to know how there's a lot of benefits to Mexico. It's wonderful to hear it, and it's And I think it's a great positive impact
Thank you.
to our country.
Yes, I'm so pleased to hear you say that. We're very proud of the work they're doing here.
Rachel, could you tell us what are the main economic sectors in which Australia and Mexico collaborate?
So I previously mentioned that we're working, or at least through Australian companies, in the energy sector and in the infrastructure sector. But recently, the Australian Embassy in Mexico commissioned a report to look into other areas where Australian companies could take advantage, including from the nearshoring moment that Mexico is currently experiencing. And we asked Ansley Consulting, who delivered the report, to look at the agri-food sector, the health sector, medical devices, also tech and defense sectors, and to look at where in Mexico in particular, in which states companies could invest in particular in these sectors. So we found that work to be really useful to focus the efforts of the embassy, and we're working including with state government agencies and authorities to look at where opportunities could exist, including Querétaro State, Coahuila, for example. So we see lots of opportunities, and we're looking to help support Australian companies to identify and to capitalise on those opportunities.
That sounds very important because I think that both countries have so much to offer each other, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a key part of our job, is to look for economic opportunities for Australian companies, and to take advantage of Mexico's geographical position in the world, so close to one of our key markets. So we're absolutely looking to help support further cooperation and collaboration in this space.
We understand the embassy has a direct aid program and that helps fund a range of projects led by NGOs in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us more about how it works and some of the recent projects that you have found?
Of course. So, as you say, we have a program at the embassy called the Direct Aid Program, and most embassies, Australian embassies in the world, have a fund like this one. It sits alongside a bigger development program, which has a very big focus in the Indo-Pacific. But here I have access to a fund of around 330,000 Australian dollars a year. We look to fund, through this fund, programs in Mexico, but also in all of our countries of accreditation. We work directly with local NGOs. And this year we have a focus on supporting projects that support women and Indigenous peoples. Projects that I visited, that I've been thrilled to visit, and in fact it's probably one of my favourite parts of the job is engaging with community groups through this program. But I visited projects that support women escaping domestic violence. We also support a shelter for trans women, which I was very interested to visit. It's a very vulnerable group, and so we're very proud to support this particular shelter. We've also supported Indigenous people, for example, in Tabasco, that have been impacted by the rise of sea level as a result of climate change. And so this community had to move and relocate, and we supported that Indigenous community to do that. But we've also supported a whole range of other projects, for example, urban gardens for people living in the heart of Mexico City with perhaps not great access to be able to produce fresh fruit and vegetables. So supporting community gardens where everyone can participate and benefit from that project. But as I said, it's an absolute thrill. It's the way I get to meet Mexican people, and very much enjoy getting out and seeing these projects and how they change people's lives.
First of all, I would like to say congratulations. Congratulations for all the work that you have been making all this time as a Australian ambassador here in Mexico. For us, Publicaciones 4T, it was a pleasure to meet you. It was a pleasure to hear about your goals, to hear about your work, to hear about all the things that you have been doing around the time. It was a pleasure for us. Do you have some words for our editorial, Publicaciones 4T?
Well, thank you. Thanks to your viewers. I'd probably just close by saying perhaps you didn't know a lot about Australia before listening to this interview. If you have an interest, please reach out to the embassy for some further information. Australia is a great place to live, to work, to study, to learn English, to travel, and we'd love to receive you in Australia in the future. Thanks for having me.